we're talking about an ESG infrastructure. Somewhat theoretical, but not. Can you clarify a little bit about what is the ESG infrastructure and what role does technology play within the ESG infrastructure?
Sure. So I think when we started Datamaran about 8-9 years ago, the challenge we saw was really to help elevate the topic into C-Suite, because it really didn't exist there. And I think it was really 2020 where we saw within our client base that increasingly general counsel, CFOs, public affairs, different kind of people were getting involved. And honestly, as we were talking to them, they're saying, okay, we need to talk to our sustainability experts. They understand this stuff. But the issue is, we are responsible now. And our board members are asking. And everyone's educating our board members on ESG. But if we're really honest, we don't have it in place. Okay, so what does it look like? So a few months ago, I spoke to Joe McCower and I said, hey, crazy idea perhaps, but can we bring a tech-powered C-Suite Forum to GreenBiz? And I think this really shows, Joel's entrepreneurial spirit. He said, let's do it. And what is this about? But he said, let's do it first. All right, all of us, all these new software providers, or also existing software providers, are venturing into the space of ESG because there is finally, I think, a recognized true need at the C-suite level to have an infrastructure in place so knowledge can be transferred. We can all speak the same language. And it's difficult. So what it means from a Datamaran standpoint, what we're doing is we are building a platform, or have been building a platform that helps you identify, manage, and monitor what are the most material ESG risks, and do so in a data-driven way. And with that, also give C-suite leaders the confidence to decide what to focus on, but even more importantly so, at times of recession, what to push aside. Having the confidence to say, actually, we're not doing that. So that's our role in it all. But I think increasingly we said we need to team up with our fellow friends in the software space, because we're inventing it together, we're inventing this space together, and we need the help from all of you, all the experts here, and the growing community here at GreenBiz to help us figure out and co-create together on what the future of ESG looks like, because we're building it.
Thanks. So we had the same kind of vision that you did. We saw the same type of behavior, which was people using consultants, consultants using spreadsheets. The people that actually were responsible for ESG at a company didn't know how those calculations were done, how the numbers came out. They didn't really understand the data behind it, the math behind it, and those kind of things. And as that has changed because of regulatory pressures and things that are looming, this is moving into the CFO suite. And with CFOs now going to be responsible, you're going to have a lot more scrutiny on those numbers. And you need to have that infrastructure in place with the people, the technology, the data, the partners, in order to have reliable numbers that you can repeatedly be able to produce your reporting, meet your regulatory requirements, and be able to do it without a big burden on your company. Because that's not your primary business, more than likely, is not ESG. And so where you have the ability to have experts in-house, and you can get tools that allow you to collect that data easily, to do the math for you, to bring in third-party information that you need, and then be able to produce, at the end of the day, a repeatable, trusted report that's transparent, that auditors can look at, that your rest of your board, everybody has confidence in those numbers. And then at the end of the day, everybody here, it's green on the sign, we need to do something better for this planet. And so by having the correct numbers, by knowing where your activities are that really make the difference, and not spending efforts and money on things that aren't going to drive your emissions down. So I think all of us here on the panel, our businesses, that's our main passion, is to do, leave the world a better place. And I think where our responsibility lies, as a human race, is to do it as well, especially, here with the companies that we have represented here and out in the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And first off, thank you to Datamaran and thank you to GreenBiz for having me and having this panel. You hit the nail on the head. The reason an infrastructure is so important and becoming increasingly important is because of the attention that ESG is getting right now. Now, it's not a new concept, right? ESG in some way, shape, or form has been around for decades, maybe even a century if we want to get creative. Sustainability, triple bottom line, ethical supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, it's being called ESG. But the reason that we're all here, that I've heard people are sitting on floors during other sessions at GreenBiz, is that there is a level of scrutiny that's coming to it that has never been here before, where it's not just something you put in a sustainability report anymore to make your shareholders feel good or your internal employees feel good. Someone may very well come knocking on your door and ask you to prove that data, and if you can't, you're going to get fined. That's never happened before. So that means, oh no, we as a company need to have something, to your point, that can log all this data, that can have it in an audible, presentable, searchable way. We can verify that it's accurate. We can show you what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how well it's managing to improve our metrics. So that's number one, the reason that infrastructure is so important. Number two, we all know this, ESG is almost absurdly broad sometimes. There are so many things that you could file under environment, social, and governance. Near anything, if again you want to get creative. So that's why you need to be able to make sure that you can manage whatever it is under that umbrella that actually is important, relevant to your companies, your shareholders, your stakeholders, which to the point of Datamaran, that's what Pat's doing, right? It's telling you what to focus on and why. And not just because you think you need to focus on it, it's giving you data to actually prove that you need to focus on it. So wherever those items are, or whatever they are that you need to focus on, it's important to have an infrastructure that enables you to do all of those things, whether it be environment, health, and safety, whether it be financial metrics, whether it be carbon, whether it be the other probably 15 types of software I can name that in theory could fall under an ESG infrastructure. That's why it's so critical to think about your actual tech stack in this, because you need to make sure you're hitting all the bases. Again, at risk of actual penalty, not just because, oh, we've decided to leave it out of our sustainability report this year because no one's looking at it.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great comments, and I appreciate everybody being here and appreciate the invite to be here. When we think about an ESG infrastructure, when we're here at Workiva, we definitely look to our partners and others in technology and marketplace. But I think something I heard yesterday there was a data and reporting session that I thought was interesting is thinking about what matters within your organization as it relates to your ESG process, because each one of your organizations is going to be different. And to the point about what matters, that probably will drive how your ESG infrastructure looks. And some of that might include existing systems that you use for human capital information, and some of it might require you to look for additional systems if you need additional robust materiality processes. Something like Datamaran makes sense. But that's, I think, a really important part of every organization's journey within ESG as they think about which of these parts of the tech stack within ESG they might need, which they might be able to borrow from teams that already use them, which I think is part of where Workiva sort of fits in and has fit in historically. A lot of financial reporting teams have used our software in the past to file their 10Ks and their 10Qs, annual financial statements for those that aren't familiar with that. And they realized, I think in 2013, as early as 2013, that they could create their ESG reports, which they maybe didn't call ESG at the time, CSR reports potentially back then. So that's kind of where we fit.
Based on the discussions we had earlier, we thought we would put this slide together to bring a little bit clarity about that business process and about that infrastructure that we've been speaking about, right? So it's setting the foundation. It's then delivering on your goals, getting even more specific into key topics like carbon and climate, and then you have to report this out. So hopefully this type of a visualization is helpful to you. One thing that I'm hearing a lot here is having a tech stack in the ESG world. It's new. It's a new concept. It's very common in other industries, other teams, marketing, finance that you mentioned, Mark, as well, right? It's quite common to have a tech stack. There is no single solution that's going to do it all. But for ESG in particular, it's very much a change management approach right now. It's tricky. What advice would you give to senior leaders at companies when looking at solutions and trying to figure out what is fit for purpose for our goals? And I'm gonna start with you, Trevor, on that one.
Yeah, so it's a big question. There's a handful of things you need to consider if you're looking to build a tech stack. One, to Mark's point, what do you already have? What is out there? What tools can contribute to the challenge that is acquiring and reporting good data when it comes to who's asking for ESG data, right? So think about what technology you have in place, even if you never thought they'd be associated with ESG, because of the breadth we're dealing with, there's a decent chance there's something there that is relevant to what you eventually want to do in terms of your ESG goals, your ESG reporting requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Then think about, okay, we have a tool, we don't have a tool, but what departments are actually material to what I'm doing when it comes to ESG? So at Intelex, for example, right, we're primarily an environment, health, safety, and sustainability software company. We primarily serve the EHS department, among others, but primarily that department and organizations. Now, data suggests, people suggest, anecdotes suggest, basically everything suggests that a big part of what actually goes into ESG data is coming from the environment, health, and safety team, and may very well already live there. Okay, we need to know what's going on with our Scope 1 emissions because we're being asked about it by the SEC. An EHS VP has probably been doing that for 25 years, just ask. It's already there. So think about what's there and where that data actually lives within your organization and those departments. And I guess my final best practice here before I pass it on, think about your goals. You are, in many cases, architecting an ESG program, a really robust one, at least, for the first time. Think about what you actually want to do and think about what it's going to take to get there. We mentioned kind of economic uncertainty right now, budgets are tight, et cetera, et cetera. That means you need to be smart about how you allocate and deploy your resources. Think about what you want to do as a senior leader, what your stakeholders and shareholders expect of you, and make sure the technology that you end up looking for and implementing reflects those goals and will be meaningful to achieving what you're actually trying to do. Don't just buy it because it says ESG on the website, right? Think about what it actually means to you and your company and be smart about the decisions you make.
Yeah, Kim, I guess next from your side, because obviously the SEC climate proposal is probably getting a lot of people looking at how they're tracking their climate data. So what advice would you give?
That's actually where I'd start is there are going to be many companies here in the US that are going to be required to report to some level of their carbon emissions. And so if you fall under that, and that's your end goal is to be able to align to that, regulation, and there's regulations throughout the world, different countries. And so you may actually, if you're a global company, you may have multiple things that you have to adhere to. And so when you're looking at your tech stack, you might need to walk back from what am I going to be required to do and find technologies that can meet that outcome. And there's several things to look at, which include what is a tool aligned to. So for Persefoni, we align to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financial Standards, built from the ground up for that. So if where your regulations lie there, one of the reasons we partnered with Workiva is because they're very much a industry-leading reporting platform. And so knowing that we have a partner that is going to adjust and build towards ever-changing reporting requirements, the data situation, and having worked at an oil and gas company and working very closely with the EHS in that role, there is data everywhere that you need to be able to identify and be able to pull in. And so all these things go into play, but I would really start with the outcome and then try and find something that makes life easier for your EHS or ESG team and work your way back there, because technology should make things simpler, faster, easier to implement, make it more intuitive, things like that, so that it's not a burden to adhere to all these additional requirements that may be coming at you left and right, or as they get announced, you may not understand what that really means. And so having a partner, we have an academy, your academy, there'll be lots of material online that can help, but building a relationship with your vendors at all the different parts of your tech stack so that you really have a partner in it, and it's not just a tool that you buy that doesn't work well for you because you're not implementing it to its full potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit it on the nail that the SEC climate proposal is one initiative right now. We're seeing the CSRD in Europe. It's encouraging a double materiality approach, right? Bringing your financial and your ESG data together. So with that, Mark, what are some of the best practices that you would recommend?
I think I heard a really good comment yesterday not to take out your internal audit team and CFO team, but to take them out to lunch. If anybody was in that session, that was pretty funny. But I do think getting acquainted with those teams, and I like Kim's idea of working backwards from what your end result needs to be. I think also kind of centering that around what's material for your organization too will help you map out what you might need based on the outcomes you're expecting, whether it's to file a report with the SEC because that's where you're subject to regulation, or file a report with some other jurisdiction in the EU because you're subject to the CSRD. Those are things that obviously would want to be influenced or are factors in your decision-making process. And I really do like that kind of start from the end and work back, but also really, again, keeping materiality in mind, because don't waste your time trying to measure and manage something that doesn't really matter that much to your organization. Like EHS, for example, maybe not as important to a software company as it is to an oil and gas company.
Yeah, Marjella?
Yeah, this might sound counterintuitive because we're, I think, an impatient bunch here. We want things to move faster, and it's not moving fast enough. But I think before we can move faster, we need to first bring new people in. And I think we should not underestimate how uncomfortable a lot of the newcomers are in this conversation. So I think, before we go into making these action plans, we need to establish especially with that triangle that was discussed before, a common ground. So how are we actually understanding what ESG is? Are we looking at this as compliance? Is this an additional cost? Is this a strategic imperative? Is this something we're doing because our peers are doing? And I think oftentimes this is a conversation that is very difficult to have internally, because a lot of people are coming at this from different angles. And as was said before, people have their day jobs. And because people have their day jobs, this seems to be additional, and this is change, and this is change management. So having that conversation and building that common ground internally with your peers, because you need them, and they're responsible now, is critical. And then second, I would say, as you start to look at what is material why? Material because it's the law. Material because otherwise you're gonna maybe not be around in 10 years from now. Material because your employees are expecting this, or you need to do this because you want to attract the right kind of talent. So I think why are you focused on these issues is critical, and the ability to explain that. And then from there, all the rest flows. If you're aligned at the top level on why you're doing these things and why they're business critical, whether it's compliance or strategy or competitive advantage or whatever it may be, then you can also trust these organizations. They're going to get it right.
And that trust is so important. So what I'm hearing is, as tech providers, we need to stop talking about features. We need to start talking about the solutions. Since we got room for one more question, I'm going to actually open it up to the room. I know I didn't say that in our prep call. On the spot. Does someone have a burning question before we head into the corporate panel? All right, it's clear. We've clarified everything. We did our job. Oh, there's a question. Yes.
Yes. So as with technology, then companies can own more things internally. So for companies that feel limited in capacity to manage these technologies, what is recommended, or how do you share the responsibility of oversight to maximize the use of these technologies?
Okay, so for those that maybe didn't hear it well, the question essentially is, since technology is new, how can tech providers support the maximum value add of using these technologies? Did I sum it up okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. All right, so let's do a rapid fire response on that, and then we'll leave it with that.
You want me to go first?
Yeah. Let's start there.
So I think that's a really great question. I think for our platform in particular, it's been around for over a decade, and companies have been using it for a similar challenge to what we're trying to solve for on ESG, which is bringing all of these disparate data sources that come from other systems together so that you can have one central source of truth to build your external and internal reporting from, which I think starts to increase the efficiency of the teams in terms of how quickly they can issue a report. You might need less people potentially to actually get the report out the door, which might mean you can hire less consultants to get the report out the door. Additionally, you get this level of transparency, I think, that's extremely valuable as we think to the future of ESG reporting that's likely going to require assurance if you don't already obtain it voluntarily, which I think is a huge benefit of using something that brings that kind of transparency to reporting and auditability.
Yeah, I can go next. From the provider side, to make sure people are getting value out of the solution, it's important for you, the provider, to have expertise, right? We get a lot of people coming to us, we talk about ESG and the solutions we have, but okay, that's great, and I'm coming to you because I'm hearing a lot about this from my boss, from their boss, from the CEO that was just on CNBC's talking about it, and we're under the gun to develop a really good program. Help us do that, because we're all learning at the same time. So for solution providers, and this is great with the ESG Academy, right? Make sure you are meeting them where they are, which in a lot of cases is pretty nascent, right? They're learning with the rest of us. So be the solution provider that doesn't just provide a solution with great features and benefits and here you go nuts. Hold their hand through it, because they're gonna need that. And it's important for us as technology companies. We kind of get one first impression. You want to make sure you come across as the expert that makes their job easier. That's what technology is about, is streamlining something, making it easier. From the buyer side or the corporate side, again, be intentional. There are a number of software companies out there that are going to say very similar things. Think about what your peers are using. Think about what's delivered results. Think about software companies that have been in the market for a while. Do your due diligence when actually comparing solutions. Again, consider your goals, consider the future regulations. Make sure whatever you have is aligned to what you're actually going to need, or else you may find yourself in trouble in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time. And that's going to bring down, potentially, if you have a really bad rollout of technology, the reputation of the department that's in charge of that rollout, and it could make things more tricky the next time. So, technology providers, be experts. Users, be clever, be smart, be intelligent, be intentional.
I'll say my answer is very, very much in line with what Mark and Trevor have said. So even though Persefoni has kind of a TurboTax-like simple interface to use, that doesn't mean that just like your taxes, you know exactly what each of those questions means. We've all filled out our taxes, come on. And so having, materials or, kind of that consulting services type function in wherever it's at in your tech stack. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a different consultant for each layer if you pretend, those are the 4 layers you have. Being able to, really have a multifaceted approach, because I say that all the time, meeting people where they're at in their journey, because decarbonization is a journey. It isn't just, start and end in 1 year or anything like that. And so depending on where you're at, you may need more of something and less of something else. And so for some companies, it's I need to be on a data hunt, right? I don't even know where my data is that I need to go collect. And in other places, it may be I don't know what I need to report to, and I don't know what these questions on the report really mean. So I think really just look at it holistically so that you can figure out where you are and where your strengths are and your weaknesses are as a company, and then find providers that can fill those gaps for you.
All right, Marjella, you have the last word.
So I think it's key that the software doesn't cause you an additional headache. So from a provider standpoint, we need to make sure it is simple enough and that you can trust the process, you trust the provider, but the outcomes are ready-made insights. So that's how we're looking at it. Especially as we're bringing in a lot of new people, they don't necessarily want to have lots of flexibility and customizability. They want the provider to have done that work essentially for them. So I think, ready-made insights, intuition in the system is really key. There's also a very specific need, I think we're practically trying to fill as service providers, and that's the need that we're all feeling even at Datamaran, the ESG talent shortage. So how can these systems fill actual gaps that normally people would fill, but given the fact that we cannot train up armies and armies of ESG experts in a very, very short amount of time, how can we counter that through technology? And then I think there's a third responsibility, and it's been mentioned already to some extent, meeting people where they are, and then helping them also understand and figure out together how these insights and data points can be leveraged. So what are the techniques you can use internally to make this very convincing and compelling?
The combination of the head and the heart, right, as Joel was saying earlier. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your insights, bringing some clarity to the noise that is in the marketplace.